Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Duaine Labno, Director of Special Investigations and Threat Intelligence at TIG Risk Services. Duaine, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to meet you. So, would you tell me about some key events in your life that shaped your leadership style?
Well, I can honestly think back to many different circumstances. I came up in law enforcement, so it's interesting. You see a lot of different leadership styles through that period of time. I started my career in law enforcement in 1999, so I had a lot of strong leaders to look up to, a lot of leaders that I wanted to emulate. And then I also saw some leaders that, probably shouldn't have been in their position. So I was able to scratch that off and go, this is someone I don't want to be like.
Whatnot?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, when I had the opportunity to finally get into maybe an informal leadership role, that's when I started developing my skill set. And then certainly when I became a formal leader, that's where I had the opportunity to really affect change in a positive way with a team. So I can think back on those specifics, and I think that's what really helped develop me as a leader.
Awesome. Those people you mentioned, is there one that really kind of set out the trajectory of your career?
So yeah, I can think of a friend of mine who's now a retired police officer. He's kind of rough around the edges. No one really wanted to be around him. But for whatever reason, he took an interest in me. When I first met him, he was just coming off of an injury, and I just got off my training program. And everyone warned me about him. Stay away from this guy. He's going to criticize you. He'll embarrass you in the field. So when I first saw him, I was getting ready to go back out on the streets, and he needed some help with some technology. It was a digital recorder. And I was scared to death of this guy. Honestly, I was more fearful of him than my patrol sergeant. And when I figured out, hey, it's just a digital recorder he needed help with, that's when we struck up a friendship. And I think the positive impact that I took away from him, he had a general interest in doing things the right way, not cutting corners.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were working patrol together, he really pushed me. I learned more from him than I learned from any of my other trainers during that time frame. We would finish up on a call, and he would ask me, well, what more could you do? And I would sit there and go, well, I don't know. And then he would rattle off 5 different things that I could have done better. So I constantly took that and put it in my toolbox, and it helped develop me. So when I became a training officer, I implemented a lot of those same standards. And to me, it's all about giving back what you receive. And I always told, folks that I was training, even to this day, I hope one day that I'll be working for you. You want good people empowering your organization. That's what it's all about.
Nice. So do you find yourself still using some of those tools even today?
Yeah, I would say without a doubt. I think if you talk to my team, they'll probably think that I can be kind of hard with my standards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about, high standards, be elite, come together as a team. I'm very selective. We do have people applying all the time. So when you sit down with them, you can have a resume that has all this great stuff on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that. But I'm more interested in knowing, what can you bring to the team? How can you work with the team in a team environment? And do you have some of those core skills that I'm looking for to keep us on the cutting edge? That's what it's about. It's a people game for sure.
Definitely. So what non-technical skills have had the most impact on your career?
Well, I can think back when I was a police officer again, kind of going back in that period of time. I was a hostage negotiator. I did that for many years. It is a technical skill, but in a different sense, because you're learning about people. Whether you're negotiating with them in person or over the phone, you're learning how to read a room. You're learning people's trigger points. You're learning what they're about, and you learn how to de-escalate a situation. And, in the type of work that I'm doing now, oftentimes we can get on the phone with someone who could be at their worst, and we're assessing that situation, or we're evaluating a potential threat. So we're not looking at it from a small perspective, even though it might appear to be a small perspective. We're looking at it from the big perspective and the potential liability that comes along with it. So being a hostage negotiator really, really helped me out during my time in prepared me for the position that I'm in now.
Does it feel like your work as a hostage negotiator has prepared you for any kind of the specific aspects of security where, the sudden events or emergent situations?
Yeah, definitely. That's one thing that I try and train my team on. We're constantly training on, critical events, the active shooters, the bomb threats, the big scale events. And when we do scenario-based training, I'm all about control during the chaos. Everyone has to stay calm. So, it's great walking into the room when they are working as a team and you have silence. I mean, there's not a lot of talking. They are communicating with each other. They're using technology to communicate with each other, but they've really honed in on that skill set to be able to work, under a chaotic situation. So that's one of the things that I try and push towards my people, and as probably you've seen throughout your career, many of these events sometimes can be reported as being more chaotic than they really are. So we have to take control of our own emotions, have a clear mindset, have a process in place, and everyone needs to know how to do their job and be very proficient at doing their job. And I think the more you practice that, the better you become during those stressful situations.
So that kind of scenario is fascinating for me because, observing different individuals, how they react to those kind of emergent situations. Do you have a process for kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say desensitizing, that's probably not the right word, but giving them experience with that level of stress so that they know how they react and how to operate?
Yeah, definitely. And when they first come in, I told you evaluating them during the interview process, how well can you speak? How well can you, provide that communication? That's vitally important because that's going to tell me, how you're going to work as a team. And for me, the most important thing is the team environment. I like to set the tone, set the standards of the expectations. It's not being mediocre, it's being elite, it's being proficient, and it's building a culture, everyone buying into that philosophy. And I think once your team buys into that philosophy and they understand this is not just an 8-to-5 job, that we are dealing with human lives, and it's important to know your skill set very well, you're going to start to see people working at that elite level. And then we introduce in the scenario-based training, where I try and make it very realistic. If it's an active shooter scenario, I'm going to interject gunfire in the background. I'm going to try and make it as realistic as possible. So, there's that perception, reaction time. It's vitally important to be able to give them those skills so they have the confidence to be able to work through those events. So on the day-to-day stuff, they're looking at it going, oh, this is not an issue. I have the confidence to work through it. But if the big one happens, they're ready to go. They're well prepared for it.
What would you say is the most valuable lesson you've learned from an operational failure?
Yeah, so I can give you an idea, and it really gave us the opportunity to self-evaluate. So this was back in 2023. I don't know if you remember the Michigan State active shooter event that took place. Yeah. So we actually had 9 employees working there at that particular time. So, your heart drops because this is real. But we really didn't have any mechanisms in place for accountability of those 9 employees. And it took us a while to figure out, who clocked in. So, we might have 25 employees working there at any given time, but we were able to eventually narrow down the 9 employees. Then what it came down to is getting a hold of those folks and making sure that they were okay. Luckily, none of them were affected by the event, but you take a situation like that and you go, how do we avoid that in the future? So we actually placed in our Risk Shield software the ability for them to have their contact information in the system. So we know at any given time all of our employee contacts, so we can call them at a moment's notice. But we took it a step further. So when they clock in, we'll know at that given time. So if that event breaks out, we have the list of all the current on-duty folks. We can focus our attention on, communicating with them directly. I would say, evaluating your process and being able to shift is important too. And that's what we like to try and take the opportunity. Thank goodness that wasn't a failure per se on our part, but it was definitely a gap that we identified, and we quickly had to pivot and change.
It's critical. So how has your approach to building trust within your team evolved over time?
That's an important question. My team has to trust me, and I have to trust my team. So it's a two-way street. I look at employment as a contract on both sides.
Yep.
So, I'm paying you to provide a service, and you're coming to work to provide that service. And at any time that can be broken, right? Both parties can go their separate ways. So I try and interject more of the family philosophy into their position. So, when they come to work, they might laugh, and, I want them to enjoy what they're doing. I don't want it to be all serious all the time, but the expectation is when the significant event takes place, all hands on deck, everyone's going to work, including me too. So, I think with my team, they understand my background. They understand the clear expectations. I always tell them too, I'm never going to ask you to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And they see that it's just not words, it's action. And I think to be an effective leader, you have to have that level of action where they trust in your decision-making ability. They know what you're telling them is straight. And, having those honest conversations where they feel they can come in. I have an open door policy. So at any time they can come in, they can sit down, and we can have straight talk. And it gives me the opportunity to understand where their challenges are, because there might be a process that's outdated. There might be some technology that's outdated, whatever it may be. I encourage that growth. I encourage that communication. And that's what's been vital on my end, having them feel comfortable in discussing whatever may be on the table that's going to make them more professional.
So tell me about a mistake that you've made that led to significant growth for you.
I can think of a lot of different mistakes in my career that led to growth. I can tell you just kind of my background and how I got to where I was at. I wanted to be three things in my life: a police officer, a firefighter, and a pilot. And I was really aiming to go the pilot route. And it wasn't until I was 13 years old, and at school they had like a job career fair where you could go and shadow. And I was late to the sign up. So the only two things that were left was radio disc jockey and police ride along. So I decided, well, hey, I'm going to do the police ride along and see where that takes me. So I went and did it, and I fell in love with the job. And here I am 26 years later, still in the similar industry. You never know where your life is going to take you and the type of decisions that you could make. I see failures as an opportunity to grow. So anytime in life you identify a potential failure, it's an opportunity to kind of polish up and get back on the horse and move forward. But kind of going back to my original statement, you never know where your life is going to take you. It's always important to cherish those opportunities and see where it's going to go. And that's what I've done in my career, and it served me well.
Cool. So what's your approach to balancing technical expertise with the people skills you need to be a good leader?
Yeah. So, I always have my team coming to me with ideas saying, hey, there's this really cool system that's out there, or this process maybe we should look at implementing. And sometimes, we all have budgets. We work within budgets. If we had a blank check and we could get every piece of technology out there, man, wouldn't that be great? But we have to have that fine balance. So I'm all about, the compelling argument, right? Because I have to go to my bosses and give that compelling argument. But it's about that two-way communication again, and kind of sitting down with them, hearing them out, because there might be, some great advantages to a new process or a new technology. But if clearly it's not in the cards, it's about having good communication and going, well, here's where we're at, and here are the tools that are in our toolbox. That's a nice to have, not a need to have at this point. Mm-hmm. So, being a leader, you have to have the ability to, sometimes communicate in that way where they understand where you're coming from, so they're not feeling disgruntled. It's a fine balance, but one that needs to happen from time to time.
Yep. So in physical security, just as in cybersecurity, there's just a constant stream of evolution, changing threats, changing approaches, things you've got to worry about, things you've got to manage differently. How do you stay up to date on those emerging threats while continuing your daily operations?
Yeah, that's a great question because it can get intense. You're being pulled away to meetings, you have employee issues, and then you have to, monitor what's going on in the world. I'm a news junkie. I don't know about you. Not only monitoring, our own software where we get those real-time feeds, but I think I probably have every app you can think of on my phone, for breaking news. And, I'm constantly looking at, the potential impact, and my team's doing the same thing. So that's my secret to success and staying up on it. And when something breaks, everything gets dropped, especially if I know it's going to impact our people in the field. And it's all hands on deck.
All right. So tell me about your definition of an effective team culture and how you build that culture in your teams.
Well, I think it's all about the execution. So you want to have a strong culture in place, and that's really about getting the right people for the position and trusting in them and then trusting you. But it's how they execute it. Having those strong processes in place is vital. And having your pulse on the situation, trust but verify. Trust your people that they're doing the right things and they're working hard and they're staying up to date with everything they need to stay up to date on. So when you're in another room that, whatever comes in, however minor in nature, they are handling it to the highest level possible. That's what I constantly do. I want that execution to be at an elite level.
So what mental models do you rely on when you're making critical decisions?
That's a great question. For me personally, when we have a critical situation coming into play, I like to break it down to the basics. I want to know what are the issues at hand, and I don't want to make it any worse than it already is. So let's break it down to the basics. Let's figure that out. Let's get rid of the hysteria. What do we know? What can we prove? And what do we need to do to overcome this particular issue? And, sometimes when you have a new person on your team, they struggle with that because they might hear third-hand information. So then they're coming to you and they're saying, oh man, the world's falling apart. And, we need to do this, scale up big. And I'm a proponent of go bigger than what you actually need and scale back down as the situation continues. But you really have to teach that within your teams of, let the evidence or follow the evidence, right? Don't trust third-hand information as being the gospel. Verify all your information. Once you have factual information in front of you, then let's deal with it. Let's make the appropriate decisions. I tell my team all the time, constantly ask yourself, is it ethical? Is it moral? Is it within the confines of the law, policy, and procedure? Is it good for the community we serve? So if we're having that in our mindset, we're doing it with a pure heart, and we should be making the right choices.
So on your way up the ladder of leadership, what was the hardest transition you faced?
I think for me personally, taking a step back, not being in the mix. Mm-hmm. Naturally, when something breaks apart, I want to be there. I want to, be engaging, jump in, start doing research, helping out any way that I can, almost to the point where it's me doing the work and no one else is benefiting from it. They're just watching it. So that took me a while, and that was hard to do, having that ability to step back and let the natural process take place. I mean, you train, but to see the benefits of that training and what your people are doing to retain that information, it's incredible just to take that step back and watch it happen in real time. And then you see that proficient level, and that your team is grasping the concept and they're doing well. But it took me a while to jump on board with that.
It's got to be hard. I mean, given that you've, physically trained in a lot of this. So in some cases, I imagine you've got muscle memory on just like how I'm going to react to this thing. I mean, it's definitely hard from a technical perspective in my world, but I can't imagine, watching an event take place and thinking to yourself, nope, I got to let them do their job. That seems tricky.
It is. And, if you're seeing some pitfalls, you step in. You have your folks on the team that are either informal leaders or hold a leadership position that step in to help each other out. And that's what makes a good team, is everyone being on the same page, understanding that process and working through the event.
Nice. So if you could go back in time and talk to yourself, what advice would you give to you?
That's a great question. I have a laundry list, and I think probably everyone does. But I think the biggest one that I learned, and again, it takes me back to police work and experiencing critical incidents. Whether someone was seriously injured or killed, that's when you start to kind of get the grasp of life. And for me, experiencing that changed my mindset. I remember, in my younger years, I would get stressed out. Every time I was called to court, that was a huge stressor for me because, I have a prosecutor who's going to ask me questions on the stand. I have a defense attorney who wants to rip apart my report. So I would sit there, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, stressing about that court date and what that was going to be. And it brought so much anxiety to me. It could be anything in life. I would stress out about it till the day of the event. But I learned quickly through some of those significant events, those critical events, that none of that matters, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be a tomorrow. Regardless of how it plays out, it will work out. May not be the way we want it to, right?
Yeah.
But we just have to take that pause and understand that this isn't forever. We'll work through it. And I wish I could have a conversation with myself 10, 15, 20 years ago, explaining that don't stress all the little minute stuff, because going back in time or looking forward, it's not going to mean anything.
Question is, can you get yourself to listen to that advice?
Yeah, in current times. That's true.
So tell me about a key piece of advice you give to young people in your space.
What I ask of my people is to be tenacious. So when they're investigating something, it's easy for them to really grasp onto the topic and just kind of look over the surface. So I want them to dig into it, and I want that tenacity. So to be effective, it's all about using all the tools in your toolbox, whether that's a program or an investigative skill. Tie all that in together and just be tenacious. Take pride in your work. Go in. I mean, we get paid to do a job, right? When we can show up and clock in and clock out. Well, if you like what you do, you might as well have fun while you're doing it. So, I try to instill those values into them, push yourself, some of those characteristics I constantly, strive to tell them to develop that.
All right. How do you screen for that tenacity in new team members?
So when I sit down with them, I'll ask them various questions about their background, obviously, and then I'll ask them to tell me a time that they worked through a stressful situation. And that gives me an idea of their thought process, how they work under pressure, how they communicate with me. And, it's funny, because we're in the people business and we're dealing with people's lives. Sometimes you'll get some oddball answers where you can tell this person wouldn't be respectful to, someone in the general public during their, traumatic time. So yeah, asking those simple questions and getting some responses, it's incredible, some of the feedback you'll get. And that kind of steers you, what this person might be about and how they would fit in to the team environment.
Seems like you could run across some pretty deterministic hard nose, just the way they talk about how they'd respond to a situation.
Yeah, because a lot of people on my team, they're former law enforcement, former military, or they have the cybersecurity background.
Yeah.
So it's a fine balance. I want human beings on my team. I don't want robots. I want people that have personality, that are going to be critical thinkers. So all that's vitally important in the moment. You get one shot at it. I think we've all had to call 911, in our lifetime. And, sometimes we have good experiences. Sometimes we don't have the best experiences. But, if you call into my team, I want it to be the best experience possible.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on how to screen for that ability to stay calm in critical situations?
Well, sometimes you sit in front of people and you may not always get it through a job interview. That's why we put a huge emphasis on training. Like my team, on the bare minimum, they receive 260 hours annually of training.
Oh, wow.
So you start to pick up people's strengths and weaknesses. You may not be the greatest person on the phone, but you're great at running intel, on systems. So, during those critical events, that's probably where I'm going to plug you into. If your strength is communication, well, you're going to be the lead person on the phone, working with that person in their time of need. And then sometimes we've had some folks come in and they seem like, hey, they're going to work out, and they don't. And it's unfortunate, but we're going to maintain those high standards. We're not going to deviate from that. So, it's a constant evaluation process and doing what's right for the people that you serve and the organization you work under.
So how do you approach mentoring the next generation of leaders in your space?
For me personally, I think back to all the times where I received training. Again, what did I like? What did I not like? What's the overall goal, in your program and how you're trying to develop it? So for me, it's really kind of instituting those high standards, pushing them at their best to be their best. That's important to me. So if they think I'm coming off rough or gruff about something, I know they can do better. And, my goal is to push them to do their best. And I think they learn something from it at the end of the day, and they do appreciate it. A lot of times I get the feedback, oh man, that was a tough scenario, or, oh, I'm so glad we did all this training because it made the real one so much easier. Mm-hmm. And then they see the benefit of it. But I want them to be future leaders of the organization. So it's not all about, how well you do your job. What I'll do is I'll give them particular tasks, and responsibilities, because I want to make a succession plan. I want the program to continue to succeed, because heaven forbid if something happens to us health-wise, and we're not around, or, we retire, the program has to continue. Mm-hmm. So it's instilling those values and those standards and having a new generation pick it up and continue it, but still evolve, because what we faced 20 years ago for threats is not the same landscape that we're facing now. In 20 years from now, it's going to look completely different. So a lot of pivoting, I guess, right?
That's how things tend to work. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow along with your work, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, certainly you can go to our website, tig.us, and you can see what our company is all about. And at the same time, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can just search my name, Duaine Labno, and you can find me on there.
All right. Thank you, Duaine. It's been a really fun conversation. I've learned a lot, and look forward to staying in touch. Thanks again.
Likewise. Thank you.